For most of his life, Wolfgang Van Halen has lived under a shadow. But it wasn't just any shadow. It was the kind cast by a true rock god, a legend whose guitar literally changed the sound of music forever. Born to guitar virtuoso Eddie Van Halen and beloved actress Valerie Bertinelli, he grew up surrounded by fame, talent, and expectations he never asked for. But his story isn't one of unearned privilege. It's a story of survival. Because behind the smiles and the stage lights, Wolfgang's journey has been one of loss, public humiliation, and a relentless fight to prove his own worth. At just 15 years old, he wasn't just given a spot in the band Van Halen, he was thrown to the wolves, replacing a beloved founding member and instantly becoming the #1 public enemy for millions of angry middle-aged fans. This is the story of how a boy who was hated for his last name fought through a trial by fire, processed an unimaginable private grief, and finally built an empire of his own. Section 1. The Bubble. A normal childhood. Born in 1991, Wolfgang entered a world of noise. His father was the most famous guitarist on the planet, his mother one of America's sweethearts. The cameras, the fans, the myth of Van Halen, all of it existed before he even understood what music was. Yet inside their home, his parents were on a mission to build a bubble. Valerie Bertinelli, in particular, was determined to shield him from the chaos of fame, to keep him grounded, and to give him a life that felt, against all odds, normal. He spent more time with toys than instruments, more time with cartoons than guitars. To the outside world, he was the heir to a rock and roll throne, but inside his home, he was just a shy, curious kid. That innocence, however, couldn't last forever. One day, while exploring his father's collection, he stumbled across a stack of Van Halen records. The covers showed faces he didn't recognize, dazzling lights, massive crowds, and his father holding a guitar that seemed almost alive. "I saw my name on the box," he recalled years later, referring to the album For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. "And I asked my dad, 'What's this?' He said, 'Oh, yeah, this is what I do.'" In that simple, quiet moment, his world shattered. The man who had taught him how to ride a bike wasn't just his father, he was a hero to millions. And with that realization, the bubble burst, and the weight of the world's expectations began to press in. Section 2. The Unconventional Student. His path to music wasn't what anyone expected. His father didn't sit him down and force a guitar into his hands. In fact, he started him on drums. But even those lessons were unconventional. There was no flashy, expensive drum kit at first. Eddie Van Halen, the rock legend, put a stack of magazines on a table and handed his son a pair of drumsticks. He told me, "If you can hit these in time, that's what playing drums is." It was a lesson in rhythm, patience, and discipline, not in flash. It was only later that Wolfgang was drawn to the guitar, but he quickly realized a fundamental problem. You can't teach genius. His father's talent was pure instinct. He said, "My dad wasn't the best teacher. He'd just say, 'Do this,' and then play something insane." He was showing his son a lightning-fast, revolutionary solo that no beginner could possibly replicate. Wolfgang realized early on that if he was going to learn, he would have to teach himself. More importantly, he realized he could never be his dad. So he locked himself away and studied guitar tabs from bands like Blink-182 and System of a Down. He was building his own sound, one rooted in modern rock, deliberately separate from the '80s stadium anthems that defined his last name. He was preparing to be an artist, not knowing he was about to be drafted into a war. Section 3. Thrown to the Wolves, the 2006 Scandal. This is the story's critical turning point. In 2006, Wolfgang was just 15 years old, still teaching himself guitar, still figuring out who he was. His father, whose health and personal life had been famously unstable, invited him to come jam with him and his uncle, drummer Alex Van Halen. To Wolfgang, it was just a chance to play music with his family. He didn't know it was an audition. Behind the scenes, the band was, as usual, imploding. They needed a new bass player to replace the band's beloved original member, Michael Anthony. Eddie had found his replacement, his own 15-year-old son. The decision was made. Wolfgang Van Halen, a high school sophomore, was officially the new bassist for Van Halen. The public reaction wasn't congratulations. It was pure, unfiltered fury. The internet exploded with accusations of nepotism. This wasn't a kid earning a spot. This was the ultimate rock star privilege, a slap in the face to Michael Anthony and to every fan who had grown up with the original lineup. Before he had played a single note on stage, Wolfgang Van Halen was, to many, the most hated new member of any band in rock history. Section 4. The Biggest Enemy. Surviving the Stage. What followed was a trial by fire. The 2007-2008 reunion tour was Wolfgang's introduction to the world, and the world was waiting with its arms crossed. This wasn't a supportive crowd. This was a teenage boy standing on a massive stage, playing iconic songs and being stared down by thousands of people who desperately wanted him to fail. It was tough, he admitted years later. I was there to support my dad, but I became the biggest enemy of every 40 to 50-year-old man out there. Every show, every note he played was a test. He was being booed, scrutinized, and torn apart online, not for his talent, but simply for who he was. He wasn't just a bassist. He was the public shield for all the band's decades of dysfunction, the living symbol of his father's controversial decision. He later confessed how much that public hatred damaged him. He was just a kid trying to play music with his dad, but he was forced to endure the kind of public shaming that would break a seasoned adult. He kept his head down, he played every note perfectly, and he survived. That tour didn't just teach him how to be a professional musician, it taught him how to be a fighter. Section 5. The Escape and the Loss. After years of touring as Eddie Van Halen's son, Wolfgang was desperate for his own identity. He needed to prove to the world and to himself that he was more than just a last name. He found his escape by joining the band Tremonti, formed by Creed's Mark Tremonti. He joined not as a Van Halen, but as a working, hired-gun musician. He proved his work ethic immediately. He recalled, "I got the call. I went over one night at midnight and learned the entire set, and the next day we were on tour." He was earning his stripes, sleeping on a bus, and building a reputation based on his skill, not his lineage. But just as he was finally finding his own footing, the ultimate tragedy struck. In 2017, his father's cancer returned with a vengeance. For the next 3 years, Wolfgang put his own career on hold to be by his father's side. On October 6, 2020, the world lost its greatest guitar hero. Wolfgang lost his entire universe. He wasn't just grieving his father. He was grieving his bandmate, his mentor, and the complicated, brilliant, loving center of his entire life. The grief was all-consuming. "I feel like crawling in a hole every day," he confessed in an interview. "But I know my dad would be really pissed off at me if I did." He knew the only way to honor his father was to carry on the legacy, but on his own terms. He poured all the pain, all the grief, and all the frustration from years of public hate into his own music. He called his new project Mammoth WVH. The name was a powerful, symbolic reclamation. Mammoth had been the original name of his father's very first band, long before they were called Van Halen. But the most important statement was in the album's credits. He didn't just write the songs. He played every single instrument himself. The drums, the bass, the guitars, the vocals. All of it. This was his definitive, undeniable answer to every person who ever called him fake, privileged, or a product of nepotism. He wasn't just riding his father's coattails. He was a one-man band, a complete musician in his own right. Section 7. The Final Vindication. In 2021, Wolfgang released his debut single, Distance. It was a raw, heartbreaking tribute to his father, a song about loss and carrying on. The song exploded. It became a #1 hit on the Billboard rock charts and, to his astonishment, earned him a Grammy nomination for Best Rock Song. It was the ultimate vindication. He had stepped out on his own with his own music and had been recognized at the highest level. He joked on the red carpet, Eddie hadn't won a Grammy on his first try either. I guess I'm following in his footsteps. For the first time in his life, he was being celebrated for his own music, not just his father's. The kid who was booed by 40-year-old men was now a Grammy-nominated artist. Conclusion: redefining the name. Wolfgang Van Halen's journey has been one of quiet, painful victory. His new life is one he built himself. He got married, walking down the aisle to an instrumental track, 316, that his father had written for his birth. He's released a second acclaimed album, and in a surreal full-circle moment, he even performed at the Oscars. He's no longer the fish out of water or the kid who replaced Michael Anthony. He didn't just inherit the Van Halen name. He survived it. He fought it. And in the end, he redefined it. He has finally stepped out of the shadow, not by running from it, but by building his own light, note by note.